Welcome to the 700 Club. There's a huge red flag coming from the White House. The Biden administration wants to reopen the consulate for Palestinians in Jerusalem. This move could signal the first step towards dividing Israel's capital city once again.
The move would also be a major triumph for the Palestinians. So how has Israel responded so far? Chris Mitchell brings us the details.
When the U.S. says it wants to reopen a consulate for Palestinians in Jerusalem, Israeli leaders say, not on our watch. The building behind me served as an American diplomatic mission for more than 100 years. In 2017, the United States recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and the following year moved its embassy to the city. In 2019, the Trump administration merged the consulate with the embassy. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says it's time to change that.
The United States will be moving forward with the process to reopen our consulate in Jerusalem. That's an important way for our country to engage with and provide support to the Palestinian people.
The proposed action would reestablish the consulate in Jerusalem, independent of the U.S. Embassy and ambassador to Israel. Professor Eugene Kontorovich says such action would be a big victory for the Palestinians.
It's a sign to the Palestinians that America recognizes Palestinian claims to Jerusalem. Instead of recognizing Israel as Jerusalem's capital, we'll be putting a question mark on that.
Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh welcomes the move and that message.
The message from this administration is that Jerusalem isn't one city and that the American administration does not recognize the annexation of Arab Jerusalem by the Israeli side. We want the American consulate to constitute the seat of a U.S. embassy in the state of Palestine.
Danny Danon, former Israeli ambassador to the UN, calls the decision unnecessary.
If they want to provide services for the Palestinians, they can do it in Ramallah, in Jericho, in Nablus, in many other locations. The U.S. decided to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and I think we should all respect it.
The Biden administration can't reverse the recognition of Jerusalem because it's too bipartisanly popular. What they're trying to do is just partially reverse it or turn back the clock to how things were before America recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital.
In 1995, Congress passed the Jerusalem Embassy Act, calling for the city to be recognized as Israel's undivided capital and to move the U.S. embassy there. It allowed the president, however, to invoke a security waiver to postpone the move. And beginning with Bill Clinton, each president did until President Trump. Senators James Lankford, Bill Hagerty, and other leading Republican senators have introduced a bill to protect the 1995 Jerusalem Embassy Act. In a statement, Lankford says their bill ensures future administrations uphold the law by keeping our embassy in Jerusalem and preventing other U.S. consular posts from being established in Jerusalem. Biden's intentions to ignore existing law does not bring the region closer to peace. It only undermines our recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Under international law, Professor Kontorovich says Israel can legally stop the move, although the State Department is pressuring it to give in. Some would say while the U.S. calls Israel a friend, its actions indicate otherwise.
There's no other country where the United States tries to coerce them to have a diplomatic mission to a foreign entity, a hostile foreign entity, in their capital.
Well, Chris Mitchell is now live with us from Jerusalem. So, Chris, is this the start of a move toward redividing Jerusalem?
Well, that's what a lot of Israelis are concerned about. Short term, it would actually reverse what President Trump did in 2019, but it would also legitimize a Palestinian claim to Jerusalem. That's what the Palestinian prime minister said. Long term, Israelis are concerned it could lead to the reversal of the 1967 Six-Day War. You know, Gordon, when Israel reunified the city for the first time in more than 2,000 years, and they're concerned that that would divide the city. Nir Barkat, he's Jerusalem's former mayor. Now he's a Knesset member. He's introduced legislation to make it against the law to recognize any consulate that Israel doesn't permit. He says nearly 75% of Israelis are against this. And he's also lobbied U.S. lawmakers this summer about this issue. And on the other hand, Prime Minister Bennett, he also is against this. And he talked about it with Biden when they met just in August.
I've got to ask, isn't this against the law? I mean, the 1995 Act that you pointed out in the piece established that Jerusalem is the undivided capital of Israel. Isn't this a move against that law?
It is. It does seem, and that's seemingly Lankford and Hagerty and other Republican senators want to codify that, even though the 1995 Jerusalem Embassy Act makes that law as well. So, you know, what President Trump did 2 years ago when he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the embassy, just like the act says, this would actually reverse that right now if they do that. It seems like they're going to wait, the U.S. that is, till probably the middle of November. That's when the current Israeli government will be able to pass a government. If they don't pass, a budget. If they don't pass a budget, the government will fall. But the U.S. apparently is going to wait till after that, and then perhaps more pressure is going to be put on the government right now to put this consulate back in Jerusalem.
Well, let's talk about the moves that Israel can do. I never thought I'd read the 1963 Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, but it seems to establish that any sovereign state has the right to approve consular activities within their country. So Jerusalem is part of Israel. Doesn't Israel have the legal right under international law to stop this move?
It does. And, Gordon, they can just say no. As you said, the 1963 Vienna Convention allows countries, sovereign countries, to allow or disallow or refuse consulars in their capital or within their borders. But as I said, the U.S. right now is pressuring Israel to go ahead and do that. We don't know what exactly the pressure is. And as I said, they may be waiting till next month after Israel presumably passes its budget. But the legislation by Lankford and Hagerty is an attempt to make sure the U.S. doesn't succeed in pressuring Israel. But Israel has the right, has the legal right under international law to say no. It just remains to be seen whether Biden and Blinken are going to try to divide the city of Jerusalem and legitimize the Palestinian claim to the city.
I assume Naftali Bennett understands how tenuous his coalition is. If he were to approve this, wouldn't it essentially end that governing coalition?
It very well will do that, Gordon, because on the right side, you have parties like his own party, Yamina. You have blue and white as well, more center, but you have other right-wing parties that may leave the government if they had go ahead and do that. Now, Nir Barkat, he's in Likud, he's in the opposition, but certainly there's enough of this fragile coalition on the right hand of the political spectrum to perhaps make this government fall in case they go ahead and do allow the U.S. to have a consulate here in Jerusalem. It's just a few blocks away from the bureau where we are right now, and that would really, really change the dynamic of the U.S.-Israeli relations if the U.S. pressures Israel to go ahead and do that. And as you said, it's really putting Prime Minister Bennett in a very difficult political situation if he was pressured to go ahead and do that.
Well, Chris, thanks for the report. Thanks for the insights. And let me remind everyone, this isn't new. Let's go back in history, all the way back to 1982. There was a senator who was named Joe Biden. And what he did is on the floor of the Senate, he threatened to cut off aid to Israel if the Israeli government wouldn't go along with his view of what they should do. So here's the quote that came back to him. "Don't threaten us with cutting off your aid. It will not work. I am not a Jew with trembling knees. I am a proud Jew with 3,700 years of civilized history. Nobody came to our aid when we were dying in the gas chambers and ovens. Nobody came to our aid when we were striving to create our country. We paid for it. We fought for it. We died for it. We will stand by our principles. We will defend them. And when necessary, we will die for them again, with or without your aid." Those were the words of Menachem Begin to then Senator Joseph Biden in 1982. Biden certainly hasn't changed his view. He thinks he can bully Israel into complying with his wishes. And I urge the current Israeli government and any future Israeli government, realize where your help comes from. It doesn't come from the United States. It comes from the Rock of Israel, God Almighty. Well, in other news, a failure for President Biden. Despite months of negotiations, Democrats in Congress still can't work out a deal on the president's big spending plan. Jennifer Wishon has that story.
President Biden's personal plea to House Democrats to pass a signature piece of his stalled domestic agenda has, for now, fallen on deaf ears. Overnight, the president touching down in Rome, where he'll meet with the Pope and kick off a 5-day foreign trip, but without the political feather in his hat he'd hoped for.
Too many no votes for the bill to pass.
The House failing Thursday to even vote on the infrastructure bill already approved by the Senate, despite the White House releasing a framework on the president's big social spending and climate change bill, as progressives have demanded before passing infrastructure. The commander-in-chief going to Capitol Hill, appealing to Democrats in person. And according to Bloomberg, telling House Democrats their future hangs in the balance, saying, "I don't think it's hyperbole to say that the House and Senate majorities and my presidency will be determined by what happens in the next week." Speaker Pelosi delivering her own message.
Do not embarrass the president by, when I put this on the House floor, to not vote for it. Basically, it's got to pass. We don't want to embarrass the president when he's overseas. That's kind of what it's come down to. It's a clown car kind of all over the place right now. Following demands from Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, the president's spending plan basically cut in half, from $3.5 trillion to $1.75 over 10 years.
This framework includes historic investments in our nation and in our people.
It includes $500 billion to fight climate change, universal pre-K, extends the child tax credit for a year, and Democrats say will reduce health care premiums. But dropped from the final outline, major programs like free community college and paid family leave, leaving progressives shell-shocked.
We put paid leave in, it's in, and then all of a sudden at the last minute, somebody said it's out.
It has some major gaps in it.
I felt a little bamboozled because this was not what I thought was coming today.
Democrats are still working out how to pay for the new spending, looking at proposed new taxes on businesses, including a 15% minimum for many large corporations and on profits earned by U.S. companies abroad. Americans making more than $10 million annually will be hit, and IRS tax enforcement will be increased. But critics doubt those new taxes will be enough. Brian Riedel with the Manhattan Institute tweeting, calling today's framework paid for is so dishonest, estimating $2 trillion in hidden costs. The big question, will the new government programs cost more than advertised? And will tax hikes bring in as much money as Washington needs? If not, federal deficits could rise even higher than expected in the coming years. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Well, this is going to end up being a colossal failure. And you look at it and you go, how in the world can you squander a governing majority? Well, the answer is the Democrats aren't aligned and they aren't in agreement. They're different wings with different agendas, progressives trying to force this socialist utopia on us. People trying to hold the line on spending, and it's just a complete mess. And what David Brody said is so true. It's a clown car. Let's go back last year to a presidential debate, and Joe Biden accused a sitting president of being a clown. I have to ask the question, who's the clown now?